Just like that, we're off to see the wizard.
Yay!
How's it going?
It's going well. It's cold. It's getting cold in Indiana. So
Yes.
we had our first snow yesterday, and that was, yeah, a little
That was
crazy.
so gross.
Not ready for it. Not
I saw
ready
your
for
post. It hurt my feelings. It really did.
it. I know. It's just too soon. It's too soon.
It's funny because my mom is further south than I am too, and she's had snow already, and I'm 2 hours or 4 hours further north than she is, and we haven't had any yet. So we're kind of dodging it so far. Thankfully, I hope I can keep that up all winter, but that's definitely insane talk.
I hope so. That is insane talk, though.
Yeah. Oh well, it could be worse, I guess. It makes the spring all that much more entertaining.
It does. It does. I was trying to explain to someone the other day the difference between like 50 degrees when it's January or February and 50 degrees when it's like September. They're two very different temperatures. Like I will throw on shorts and a t-shirt for 50 degrees in January.
Yeah, you see it here too. Like as soon as like it warms up just a little bit, it'll be like 1 degree and everyone's out in shorts and a t-shirt. And then if it's 1 degree now, everyone's like bundled up in winter jackets with scarves. such a fun dynamic.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm not sure what to call you. I do know your name, but like many people like yourself I interact with, I'm so familiar with your Instagram handle that in a lot of time in my head, that is what I call you. So let's start with that. What do you call yourself in real life and online?
In real life, I call myself Kris Duncan. I write under that name. That is my name. On Instagram, I go by Poetica Ex Machina. And that was the one stroke of naming genius that I have ever had in my entire life. Like, ask me to name something, I'm the worst at it. But that was like a stroke of genius for me. And I have, as a result, never changed my name. So that's who I go by on Instagram. I'm a poet, first and foremost, of anything. And so I live in that world almost as much as I live in my day job world.
Which is how I found you. I think at the time I was just kind of getting into my head that I wanted to start posting some poetry. So I had started looking. I've always saw, like, if I was going to produce poetry, I mean, I've been writing songs for forever. So that's one way to do it. But just straight poetry, I've always been like, well, I've got to write a book. I've got to write a book. I've got to write a book. And then I started to notice a couple of years ago that there was a lot of really good poets kind of doing it through Instagram. Putting up usually a part of a poem, and then in the comments or the caption, if you will, writing the rest of the poem through there. And I thought that was a really cool medium. So I started looking through people who were doing that, and I found yours. And unfortunately, I had it planned to read one of yours. That was my favorite, but it's on my phone, which is pointing a camera at me right now. So I can't do that. But
okay.
Yeah, I really liked. I'm the same way with what I appreciate with lyrics and stuff too. I really like raw. Like there's a commonality in poetry to kind of, and it makes sense to find really flowery, big words and, all that kind of stuff. But I've always really appreciated people who can say just as much with a little less, and like really kind of cut to the jugular, so to speak, with the words. And you're great at doing that. And the little images that you put up as well with it, I've always really loved. So it led to me reaching out to you, and we went from there. So how did that all come about? Like, I know as a musician, there's certain life experiences that kind of lead to that, and all of my writing kind of follows suit. So kind of what brought you to it?
It's such a good question. What brought me to it was a school assignment when I was in grade school. I was given a task. I was given a task to make a haiku. And so it was my first experience of trying to say something in a different way, in a more beautiful way, and in a more succinct way than I would typically do something. And so I did it. And my mom would tell you that I was totally hooked on it after that. Like I wrote haikus all the time. And then I discovered that you could do all kinds of other poetry. And I wrote disgusting love poetry that I sent to like Morton Harkett of Aha back in the 80s. You know, I'm still waiting to hear something back from them. I feel like maybe it just got lost in the mail. But in my 20s, I came to it a little bit more seriously. I wanted to get published. I started reading at open mics. I started reading my own booked, like I got hired to do some public readings at different coffee houses in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And so I really decided I wanted to hone my voice. And that's really where I learned how to write rawly, but beautifully about pain, I think is what the feedback has always been for my work. And then, you know, I got married, and I was married for 16 years, and I wrote 2 pieces in that 16 years.
Go
you
figure.
know, I completely just lost my ability to write. And magically, when my marriage ended, I started to be able to write again. So that's how I found Instagram. I found Instagram I was, you know, just getting into the platform for regular like life sharing. And I started to see poetry on there. And I thought, you know, I could do that. I have a balance of work, you know, while I'm working on some new stuff. Let me give this a try. And I started right when it really started to take off. Like I got in at absolutely the best time it was to get in. Lives were just becoming a thing. Open mic, you know, reading was just becoming a thing. I loved the community, and I've been a part of it now for 5 years.
Excellent. And I relate to what you were saying. I was married for a long time too, and hopefully she doesn't ever watch this, but she used to always like, you know, you write all these songs all the time, you write all this poetry all the time. How come you don't write anything for me? And I'm like, definitely at the time, I'm like, well, I like you.
That's not the way I work.
A lot of what I'm writing is about things I don't like. You know, it does come from, you know, a pain in the background, and it does come from, you know, the shittier experiences in life. My poetry wasn't coming from, you know, the fact that like you're nice to me and I'm happy about it, you know. That's just not where it was coming from.
And that's such a thing, right? There's the whole like, why can't you just write something happy? I get asked that a lot. Could you just write something happy? It's like the quality of happiness is such that it stems from the inside and it goes out. Right. And so my experience of happiness, I bring that to other people by simply being happy. And there isn't any, people relate to that in the way that people relate to happiness. And there's not a lot of need to be flowery and write about that in my mind. There are people who do it really well, and there's a place for it. But in my personal aesthetic, it just doesn't work. And so to me, the pain is something that comes from outside in. And when something from the outside connects you to what you're feeling on the inside, that's where magic happens. You know, that's when people are, you know, moved and don't feel alone, and they feel, you know, like something can still happen that's good for them. And so my answer to that is I could write something happy. I don't think it would be very good, but I could do it.
I think a part of that comes from a lot of the time when we're looking for something external to make us feel any sort of way, whether that's better, whether that's maybe worse, or just to like trigger emotions. We're usually not in a happy state, right? Like that usually does come from, you know, whether it's a depression or whether it's a pain or some type of incident in your life. That's when you kind of go looking out for those, you know, inspirational quotes or poetry or music to relate to or something to that. So I do think it's really important. You know, the type of music I am into is more dark. When I first started singing, it was always like country music and happy, you know, kind of love songs and whatnot, like Bon Jovi songs, shit like that. Nice. And then, you know, as a teenager, when I started writing, that wasn't what I was writing. You know, like
Mhm.
I've got a few songs in my repertoire that are, you know, pretty love songs and whatnot, but they typically came from a point in the relationship where things were strained or there was a problem, and I needed to be able to express that happiness in such a way that would make them see it, right? So
Right.
for me, it's always been about like a personal storytelling tool.
Yes. Yes. And that has been by far, for me, maybe the biggest, longest commitment that I've ever made is to honesty in my own story when I'm writing. I One thing that I'll tell you that's not widely known yet, although I've hinted at it a little bit, is that I'm well into editing on my second book, and I'm so excited. Um, when I go back and I read some of the things that I've written, I'm like, my mom's not alive anymore, so she doesn't have to read this. But my God, if my dad gets his hands on this book somehow, I don't know how I'm going to be able to stay. I don't know how I'm going to face him again. But it's important to me. It's important to me. You know, I was in a very, from my poetry standpoint, a very public relationship with a muse for almost 5 years. It was a very toxic, very bad situation. And I wanted to be honest about that journey. You know, I made decisions to stay in that relationship, and I knew what I was getting from it. But I still had feelings about it and wanted to express it. And so, you know, I said, I'm going to be 100% honest about this, and it's not always going to make me look good. And sometimes when I'm feeling really, really sorry for myself, I write bar napkin scriptures, which are like the darkest version of myself that's out there. So I believe that if it's going to connect to people, it has to be honest.
Absolutely. And you brought something up there, a muse. Maybe for people who don't understand what that means, you can take a stab at explaining it to them.
Oh my gosh, sure. So I can only explain it from my perspective. As a creator, someone who creates art, there are things, songs, and eventually people who inspire you to do a different kind of work, you know, better type of work than you typically would. And so it's not uncommon for writers to have muses. The trope is usually old men writers with a young nymphy, you know, muse. But this man just blew up my talent to the point that I wrote better than I had ever written in my life. And it's impossible not to fall in love with that.
Absolutely. It's impossible.
Not to fall. It's the one thing you should never do, but it's impossible not to fall in love with someone who makes you, you know, in such a fundamental way, a better version of yourself.
Yes, it could also get dangerous, which is probably where that led. I know it has for me in the past too, where you know, because they are bringing out that side of you, and that's a positive. A lot of the times you start overlooking all the more negative things, or let's call them red flags that may have popped up along the way.
We've created some memes about red flags.
Yeah. And you've written a few poems about it as well. I think that's ultimately how we started talking to each other through DM was because it seemed that we were going through similar processing in that same way. And not that for me ever started this kind of obsession, but I've had an obsession with the psychology behind sociopathy, narcissism, and psychopathy for my entire life. So in terms of a muse and the artistic expression that, you know, those people can kind of create in your life, and it's kind of true for any narcissistic relationship. There's in order to get their hooks into you, they have to create a lot of good. And they kind of, like, especially for an artistic person like yourself or myself, they need to be able to get into that muse slot, right? Like they do recognize that, in order to get their hooks into their potential victims, if they're an artist or some type of creative, then they definitely need to be that muse. So in doing so, and like with any, you know, type of sociopath, they're very good at creating masks, and they're very good at reading us and being able to pick out from us the things that we value dearly and then reflect them back to us. So it can be a danger at times to tell that, or it can be difficult, I guess, to say at times to determine which is which and act accordingly.
It is. And, you know, I have said, you know, my degree is in psychology. So my own behavior, it fascinates me as much as anything. You know, I've never let a human treat me the way I let this person treat me. Never. I never would let someone treat me that way again. So there's this magic in alchemy that is like, what is the combination of factors that makes this person so utterly and completely attractive to you? And, you know, he did it exceptionally well. Who else is going to be a muse except someone who wants to be worshipped? I mean, of course they're narcissists. They're being worshipped by someone. The thing I take away from my relationship with my muse is how he was never afraid that I loved him. You know, he never promised me anything in return. He put up with a lot of what would look like crazy behavior in a normal relationship, but was pretty tame for ours. But ultimately, he was never afraid. He needed me to worship him. That's what validated him completely. And so you know, I told him 2 weeks before my first book came out, which is entirely about him, that I was releasing a book that was entirely about him. You know, most people would run at that point. He was the first person who bought it. And so well, it's interesting. It's an interesting relationship.
It is. And and then from our side, like you pointed out in your first marriage, and I've been there too, when we also subconsciously understand that, you know, this friction, this problem, this chaos that this person's creating in our life is leading towards our art. And there's a part of us, you know, a little voice in our head being like, no, don't get rid of him.
That's He's right. Good. That's right. Good. There's a payoff there in the end because yeah. But you know what? I think the good thing is being able to, there was a long time I was afraid I wouldn't be able to write about anything else. And so I really pushed myself over the last year to start writing, really the last 2 years, to start writing things more from the perspective of me and my journey, writing about social issues, writing about political issues, you know, things like that, being able to really push myself to do that. And it's been good to find that he is not the magic. I'm the magic. I make that happen, right?
Exactly.
You know, and that is probably the single biggest thing that let me be able to walk away. How sad is that? Like my challenge is still in place. I can finally let him go.
I don't think that's sad at all. That's a learning experience. It's what's sad is his behavior, right?
Yes.
What's sad is that there are people out there that have that broken spot in them that creates that type of behavior where they feel like they need to like cling on to someone like you and take that from you because they're not capable of generating it on their own, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's an unfortunate place to be in, and unfortunately that type of dynamic is, you know, something that's become normal in our society. Like in a way it's praised. I've been talking about it over the last few years as like a subspecies of human.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I mean, your psychology background as well, so you'll understand that like psychopathy isn't just something that happens. Like it doesn't just get created out of thin air. There's a process to it, and we have different processes that can create it. We have generational processes, right? Which usually we narrow it down to like a 3 generation of abusers. That third one is kind of born abusive, right? And I would imagine 3 generations of anything that would crush your empathy would cause someone to be born without it, right?
Yes.
And I think that based on, my own studies into psychology and anthropology and whatnot, that this is quite new for humanity. Like, it's not something that's always been this big. I think that it's growing, and it's growing really quickly. And I think that has a lot to do with like cultural programming and various other topics.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that completely.
And so, yeah, I do actually look at them like they're a different species of human, like, like Neanderthal versus Homo sapien type different. I know that's a little extreme, but
no, but I mean, when you look at, I think it's valid. I think it's valid.
It's unfortunate. I don't know what to do about it, but
I don't know. I mean, there's such a reverse course that's needed on so many so many levels in humanity right now. We could probably talk about that for hours.
Well, yes, and obviously we're seeing a lot of it with current events. Just
Sure.
for algorithm's sake, I try to avoid some of the big buzzwords, and so I call the affliction the joy. So you can get the joy, you can catch the joy, you can spread the joy. There's people who've taken a solution for it, which we're going to call the lollipop. And then there's people who don't want that solution that we call sugar-free, just in case that topic comes up.
That's brilliant.
But even based on the joy and its effects on our society, this division that it's causing, like even between lollipops and sugar-free, is quite insane at this point in time. And it does seem like a lot of those personality types that we were just talking about exist on both sides of that and are just pushing it nonstop.
Yeah. The extreme ends of both sides are certainly creating an additional, tension is a light word, to use. But there is, I think what we're seeing now has been fomented by years of subdivision that has just been silent, for the past, 60, 80 years. And people feel like the internet has given such a pulpit to so many people. And so, there are just a lot of people who are preaching out there. And a lot of them are preaching on very, very different ends of the spectrum.
And because we're all so unstable, as individuals and definitely as societies or even communities. I'm not sure where you live is like, but like you see it here in Toronto, where there's like fights on streetcars, there's fights in the street, and people just arguing one group against the other. We didn't have quite the political division that you guys did in the States, but there is enough of it here with our I'll try to be nice, our prime minister, I'll just call him by his title, doing what he's doing. I had so many other words to call him right there, but I was like, none of those are appropriate. But you guys saw it really heavy with the Trump era, as it's being referred to now, right? So how was that in your particular state? Was it really noticeable?
Yes, it was. I live in a conservative state that's largely, pro Trump. And so there's a lot of that here. So, there are concerns about the outcomes that are still cascading down in different states that, were a part of that administration, that are really scary to see. It's I'm seeing in my country this devaluation of women, devaluation of anyone who is different from the norm. And I particularly see it in southern states where I grew up, where I spent most of my time. And it's very scary. It's very scary to see the support that some of these things have, that, neighbors are willing to turn neighbors in, for bounties. And, there's just some insane things that are happening as a result of that time in the country's life.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. I was thinking about it the other day, just kind of brainstorming, and I got thinking about, like, I remember, like, I'm Canadian, so my perception of it is from an outside point of view. But I remember, like, even Canadians being like, "Oh, we just need to get Trump out and Biden in, and everything will be okay."
No.
And I think in theory they might have had a good idea, but if you would need to replace Biden with somebody competent, right?
Right.
And if they did, like, maybe if they had have replaced Trump with someone competent, then it might have led to healing some of the problems that were created over that time. But they didn't. So.
I mean, it all started, the worst of it started when Obama was elected. I mean, that's when the insidious, stuff really started to happen, and you started to see the division. I see it just by, and I'll age myself by saying this, looking at my Facebook feed, memories that have come up from previous elections through this month, and things like that, and seeing the vitriol that was coming even from the beginning of when Obama won. You've just seen this slow de-evolution of, you see this cry for values, and this slow de-evolution of, like, actual values, that value life and people, and that's not on any one issue. That's just across the board.
Yeah. We have the same thing here with maybe not so much values, but or maybe it is values, but rights. Like, we have our government who's talking about protecting Canadians' rights while doing everything within their power to destroy our rights, like take our rights away, all in the name of the joy and whatnot, of course, and keeping each other safe, which is a slippery slope for all of us who've read history. There's a lot of dangers to taking that mindset on things, but it's I'll listen to our prime minister talk about protecting human rights and being like, I think you've done more to violate human rights in the time you've been in office than protect them, and I think you're actually one of the worst I've ever seen in terms of doing that. And it's funny because he'll actually still reflect back to you guys and be like, the how did he word it? He was like, the United States had their moment with Trump.
Did we have our moment with Trump?
But meanwhile, he's doing exactly the same thing in our country.
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, especially when you talk about body autonomy. And it's been interesting to see since the Joy, sort of where my social group lands on the spectrum, and they do land all over the spectrum. And I was chatting with one of my sugar-free friends the other day, because I'm a lollipop. And we were talking about the Texas abortion bans and things like that. And she was like, but Kris, autonomy is autonomy. Body autonomy is body autonomy. And I'm like, well, shit. God, you're right. So yeah, body autonomy is body autonomy, and it needs to be that way.
We're seeing a lot of stuff like that. Like, I don't even like the terminology of the left and right, but it's like the left has become so left that they're actually eating each other. It's like they're canceling each other, they're canceling themselves, all in the process of doing that. I have my kids are transgender, so there's a part of me that obviously sees it one way, or maybe you could say I have to, because of the the fact that it's a reality in my life. But that's not to say that I can't respect people who are looking at it from the other side, right? And I feel with, like, a lot of these issues that's kind of the part that we're all missing. I do blame the media and social media, especially with the algorithms, pitting us against each other like this, like deliberately. We all know that that's happening. But I think that we as human beings have a responsibility to, take our power back from AI in that sense, and start reeling it back and remembering where our humanity lies. There was a study that just came out talking about how our emotional intelligence is degrading through all of this, which is very scary. Like, that's something that really did separate us from primates, as an example, really does separate us from the majority of nature, is our ability to have a heightened level of emotional intelligence, because we do have this massive spectrum of emotions, right? And to not be able to navigate that, it really is inviting chaos into the world.
It is.
And so things like what you do is important, because it people can relate to poetry as an expression of emotion and then learn about themselves, right? So,
and hopefully for the most part, it's absent of politic, although it's not. I have censured my fair share of mediocre white men in the course of work that I've done, but for the most part, hopefully it's as inclusive it's an inclusive experience as it can be, being incredibly subjective and personal.
Yes, but I think that the magic comes through doing it honestly, which is something that I noticed, and you've mentioned, and something I've always strived for too, is just to even if this makes me look bad, it's the story, it's the truth, right? And
it is. I take the same approach to parenting. I have a teenage daughter, and with age appropriateness, I live with that same level of honesty with her. She has some pretty big questions about where her life is going right now. Her friends are having sex, they're experimenting with drugs, they're doing all the things that teenagers do, and she's navigating that. And so, that I feel like the commitment to honesty in my poetry has prepared me well to have these conversations with my kid. And she knows through reading some of my poetry that I'm not a smack talker. I'm not this seriously stupid teenage parent that doesn't know anything. There's when you relate to people with that level of honesty, they're going to be more open and they're going to give it back to you.
That's a very important thing to say, because that is true. We all kind of want people to be honest with us, but how honest are we really being with them? And more importantly, how honest are we really being with ourselves?
Yeah, I go back and I read poetry from 2017, 2018 for me, which was when I first started dating again after my divorce. And everybody says they're not going to have that drink a lot slutty period after their divorce. Everybody does. And I was going through a period where I was just drinking way too much, and there were something, and I can remember this one night being so drunk and it being odd that I would remember how I felt, and waking up the next morning so disgusted with myself that I needed to write a piece. And I did, and I wrote it, and it was very this is ugly. This is an ugly side of me, but I made myself post it because I'm not going to stop being honest just because it makes me look flawed, because I'm as flawed as the next person. I'm always floored on Instagram when people come to me and ask me for relationship advice. I'm like, no. I'm not the person to ask this question. I am not qualified.
Thankfully, because I've been that kind of same brutally honest about stuff like that. I do get asked a lot of questions for a lot of different types of advice, and I think everyone's figured out, don't ask me for that type of advice. Right? I'm the stupidest asshole on the fucking planet when it comes to that. So just don't ask me questions.
That's right. And plus, I'll tell you something completely different than what I would do. I would tell you the right thing to do, but I would never do it. So.
Yeah, and that would happen if I did get asked. But I think most people have figured out, yeah, don't ask that to him. He clearly doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. It's been 6 months. He's writing about another one. Clearly, he hasn't learned the lesson yet. Let's just ignore that. But anyways, there was something there. Oh, the concept of the muse, coming back to that, there's this, I can't remember where the quote came from, but it's basically like, if you want to become immortal, get an artist to fall in love with you.
Yes.
Right? And I'm already kind of looking at my own body of work and stuff that even still comes out of me now, and realizing that, those people, it doesn't matter how far removed from my today they are, they still live at the end of that pen, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, I have a musical mentor that I work with because I'd eventually like to get into songwriting. And I have spoken with him on a couple of occasions about this fear of not being able to write beyond this experience, beyond this muse. Excuse me. And he was like, girl, I have been picking scabs from when I was like 15 years old. You just have to dig back. And so I think that is an interesting thing to do, to reflect on, older work, to reflect on older experiences that you're looking at with your adult eyes, or healthier eyes, or maybe unhealthier eyes, wherever you're at in your life, and writing from a different perspective. I've been in love with two men in my life. They've both been criminals. I mean, just hands down, they've both been criminals. And I still think about the first, and he was when I was 17. And so I've recently been playing around with writing more about that relationship from how I see it now, and the memories that I have versus all of that volatility in the beginning of it and in the meat of it. And that's, trying to do that honestly has been difficult, because you're not only looking through the lens of your feelings at that point, you're looking through the lens of time. So
absolutely, it is very similar to like a therapy, right? Going back and working back through things. So yeah, I would imagine it's just, you're just ripping the scab off and letting it bleed again. That's what it is.
I mean,
maybe a little bit more. Yeah, maybe a little bit more attentive to how much it's bleeding, or why, how you got that cut in the first place, right?
Right. Or change the focus to the lesson, right? I think that's where I'm at right now with, I just ended things with my muse 4 weeks ago, quit cold turkey, and trying to look at writing about it now from a place of forgiveness, and where do I go from here? Not without him, but just where do I go from here?
Do you find that when you're writing through these things that there's a physical reaction to the healing process?
Definitely.
I notice, like, if I'm writing about a certain subject, I'll kind of hit the end of it and I'll be like, okay, I feel better. And then like literally within a 12-hour period, I'll get like something like a headache or some type of, it's almost like my body's detoxing.
Yes, there are, I think that's a great way to put it, is the body is detoxing. There is a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago, and I remember it, because I never remember my own poetry from my heart or from my mind. But it is basically, love is a burden. It is not kind, and I abhor it. I rebuke it. I reject it. I abhor it. I remember saying that. And after, one of my girlfriends was like, how did you feel writing that? And I'm like, I felt like it was like vomitous to get it all up. But for the next 3 days, I was just like, my body was detoxing from that, horrible feeling about the way that I felt about love.
Yeah, I totally understand it. I've been there before too. I think that, our physical well-being has a lot more to do with our psychological, spiritual well-being than we often do give credit in that way. And I don't know about your spiritual side, but obviously through psychology, you would have learned that as well. And I can only assume, like, I think that all artists are prone to a kind of spiritual nature in and of themselves. So I would imagine it's affected you that way too. Absolutely.
And I think it's so interesting that you say that, because one of the themes in my writing has been, and I mean this from a creator standpoint, it's easy to read into my work to think that it's about women. But when I think about creators, I think all artists are made in the image, if there is an image of God, then creators are made in the image of God, because, that's a creator being. We were given the gift to bring something here that was not here before, that will last forever. And whether that's bearing children, whether that's painting paintings, whether that's art, music, poetry, whatever it is, you are birthing something into the world that was not there before. And that's a gift that not everyone has.
It's very true. It kind of makes sense, I think, that we associate that with a more feminine energy, though, because of the connection to, procreation, like the
absolutely,
creation of life, right?
Absolutely.
So I also think that tends to be why it's so much easier to connect with female artists a lot of the time.
I think so, probably.
That's probably energetically has something to do with it, because even myself, like as a man, I'll give an example. I just got into this album by an artist named Halsey, and she's a girl who's probably like 20 years younger than me, writing from her own personal experience. But when I'm listening to these lyrics, I'm like, fuck yeah, lady, like that's exactly, I get it. Yeah, hell yeah, right? So
yeah.
And I don't know, like I don't know a 20-year-old male artist that I can relate to in that same way. It's almost like they're approaching art from musically anyways, or poetically approaching it from a different place that is a little bit more age dependent and sexual dependent than that crossing. So
right.
And I personally, just my own personal theory, think that has something to do with procreation and us understanding that women are creators, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
But now, of course, boys can have babies.
It's all a spectrum now. It's all a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if you might do me a favor.
What's that?
I actually put together a few pieces to read. Would you let me read some of my work?
I would love that. Actually, I was going to ask you to do it eventually.
See, no, it's all about me.
Well, then, no, I you know what? I really wasn't thinking I would let you do that, but now that you've asked so nicely, you go right.
No, it's been, I was hoping that you would say yes. I was hoping that you would ask, because it's been a long time since I've gotten to read. So I just we've talked about a sort of a few different areas of my work, and so I pulled a couple of different, hopefully representative pieces together. So I figured I would share just a few of those. You said you had a favorite. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but do you remember what it's called? Because I can read it for you.
I don't. I'd have to look at my phone, which would.
Okay, I've been there. I have been there. So the first one I'm going to start with is actually one of the more, it's raw, but it's one of the more political or social pieces that I've written. So it's called Bare Minimum Women. Mama always said, let them chase you, as if I were something to be hunted, already at a disadvantage somehow. Daddy always said, use what you got, but don't get knocked up, as if I knew my power, much less my worth at the age of 15. Smile. Be witty yet vapid, be sexy and also demure, look your best and be unobtrusive. Serve from the left, serve from your heart, serve from your knees, but most of all, be grateful that he called you, texted at midnight, that he doesn't hit you, that he shows up on time, that he shows up at all, said that maybe someday he could love you. He won't. He doesn't. It never changes, but we do, as we clamor over each other to share screenshots of text messages that support our narrative that there is more to this than just sex. There isn't. We have become bare minimum women who feast on crumbs dropped by the hands of men who would as soon block your number as have a conversation about your needs. They keep us around because it's hard to break in a new lover. We keep them around because we are afraid of our own power, of who we will be if we could survive alone, needing nothing, taking what we want, what feels good. We have been trained from birth to serve someone other than ourselves. We are transferred in ownership by our fathers. We need not be things, my sisters. We need only remember that we are the true image of God, each of us. We endure, no more enduring. Now it is time to rise. So,
I don't know if clapping is quite appropriate, but there's a little clap there for sure.
I don't know if clapping is appropriate.
And that definitely touches on some things we've already talked about in terms of like the way that we've been conditioned to believe that we're supposed to be a certain way, whether that's male or that's female, whatever it is. I do absolutely agree. And I've been speaking about this in my own way that on both sides of it, male side and female side, society has more or less been pointing us in the wrong direction, and definitely pointing us in a direction that leads away from each other as opposed to together, or like an understanding of each other. So yeah, I really liked that.
Well, thank you. That was one of my it came from a girlfriend and I were talking about these relationships where, you know, we tend to just like, we're just grateful that somebody texted us back. We're so used to being ghosted at this point. And so I had made a comment about us being bare minimum women, and she's like, you need to write that. And so that's what came out.
Excellent.
I've got another. This is a little bit more geared towards, this is a newer piece that I wrote. So this is a little bit more like where I am in my writing space right now at the moment. I didn't title this piece. I am a traveler with no destination. Mind and heart suddenly quiet, and only the road in front of me. It's been a month now since I wished you well and closed the door. I thought that it would hurt more, but your careful training, 4 years of it, prepared me to survive this last loss. I said, come on, make me hate you. It's the one thing I ever asked of you that you could give. I burned with it for a while, anger blazing a trail through my veins, cleansing my heart, leaving me with a taste of ash on my tongue. I have risen before. I am comfortable with their flavor. There will be moments, I'm sure, that pierce me with their longing, but I am grateful for this silence, this conservation of energy. Loving you has been difficult on me, and it shows. I'd like to think I gave it everything I felt safe getting. I left nothing on the table I was not willing to let go. You took all of it, and I hope it heals you a bit. I'll always think of you as the baddest man alive. I'll always hear your voice in my dreams, but there will be no more pain, no more waiting, only this new kind of love, the kind where I give myself everything I need to heal from you. So thank you. So that was beautiful. That was a little sweeter and from that place of like healing. So not quite as raw as some of the other pieces that I've written.
Your sword was still in your hand though. I definitely felt that.
It was. And so let's see. I'm gonna read you this one because I love it.
Perfect reason.
It's probably not the best piece that I've ever written, but I absolutely love it. In my head, you play this game whenever I text you of withholding responses and rolling your eyes over the fact that I couldn't take the hint that 3 days of silence means you're too busy getting fucked, too fucking busy to care and only tolerate me because I have a gifted mouth. It leaves no room for the busyness of life or the aura of neglect that surrounds you. It doesn't mention that you're likely in your underwear in a broke down favorite old chair playing video games and cracking White Claws until the hour gets late at 10 p.m. In fact, my mind stands in naked, unabashed silence as you demonstrate over and over that you are not only wrong for me, you're just wrong. No, my mind adores you and assumes you're anywhere but where you actually are, which is probably on the shitter reading this on my Instagram, wondering what douchebag I'm talking about.
Well played. Well played. It's another one I can definitely feel the way to relate to.
Let's see. I had one more saved. If it's okay if I share one
Absolutely,
more with you. Okay, let's see. Which one do I want to share? Okay. This is a raw one, but it's an angry one too. So I'll close on this. This will be great. Yeah, this will be the last one that I read for you. It's called They're Killing Women Down in Texas. I am tired of the hands of these white men over my mouth, up my skirts, on my neck. They're weak and afraid of everything save for violence. They will use violence against you, my sisters, and you will suffer at their hands long before they are done with you. Their fingers are in everything: pies, the till, vaginas, counting dollars, counting daughters, counting on their father's legacies to see them through. They have even turned us against each other, sacrificing us at the altar of astronomical expectations, the specious commoditization of bodies sold by the TikTok, monetizing puberty and the awkward growth of girls into presumed whores. Their violence is singular when it's emotional. The lady in the streets, freak in the sheets requirement, one of many paradoxes inflicted upon us. Daddy's little girl should be a repentant masochist who takes cock in the ass and no bullshit in the real world. I've got daddy issues, and I've been talking for a while now. They're killing women down in Texas, putting bounties on their heads, the wheezing gasp of the good old boy collective, a rank exhale in the face of human rights. Fuck the patriarchy has to be more fashionable than being stupid if we're ever to be saved. Write your fucking congressmen, vote them out.
Fuck yes. Well done. And I agree with a lot of sentiments in that.
There's a certain time, I mean, obviously that is not meant to be directed at every man that's out there, right? There's a certain profile that piece fits, but it's just, as we talked about earlier, you know, I have visceral reactions to some of the things that are happening in my country, particularly to women, to the trans, to the LGBTQ community. And it's just a physical aberration, and it needs to come out. So that's how it came out.
And I always say it's better than him. You know, I think
better out than him.
Yeah, with most things.
True that.
But you know, and I think that's why we as artists do this, is because we can feel what these words or these pictures or these sounds building up within us are actually doing. And we understand that if we don't find some type of healthy outlet for this, it's going to do one of two things. It's going to eat us from the inside and we're going to die, or we're going to explode and we're taking other people with us.
That's right. That's right. And you have to reduce that pressure as much as you can internally, you know. I had a question for you. When you write, do you tend to write like connected to the source and just stream of consciousness and really like it just comes out? Are you disciplined with the way you write and that it's an intentional set of word and phrase? Like what is your process for writing? And is it different for poetry versus music, or any other writing versus music?
It is. It's even different from musical project to musical project. Like okay. There's sometimes this happens most of the time when I'm like kind of writing my own songs, like on an acoustic guitar and doing that. A lot of that does come from poetry that I write out. And then later I'll be playing on the guitar or something, and for whatever reason, those words that I wrote will come to my mind. And so I'll see, can I connect that to this by melody, right? By singing. And usually it'll work somewhat. Like if I have like a whole poem, I can probably fit, maybe 60% of that poem into the piece of music that I've written. And then I have to kind of rewrite it to fit the music a little bit better. Mm-hmm. Okay. I write with two different bands, and in one of the bands, I'm writing lyrics with someone else. So there's a collaboration there, which also applies sometimes to my other band because we do like guest spots on our albums. Like we have other singers come in and join me. But with the other project, basically I'll have the whole song in front of me and then I'll be writing to that. So I'll start with whatever the piece of music makes me feel, and I'll just start writing out poetry based on that type of feeling.
Okay.
And then go back and try and fit some of those lines into a melody and fit them into the song. And then the rest of it all just comes from, I'm overwhelmed by whatever it is, that emotion, that experience, that relationship, whatever it is. And I know I need to get it out somehow. And so I will just sit down, stream of consciousness, and more or less just vent, and then kind of go back and edit.
And edit from there. Okay. Fascinating.
How about yourself?
I used to do it one way and now I kind of do it another. My writing has really changed. I used to be very, well, especially in the height of everything with my muse, I was very connected to my creative side. And there was a lot of, like, the work was just prolific that was coming out. It just all needed to come out. And so that was just very stream of consciousness. And there was a time that I just was almost superstitious about going back and editing anything, because it's like, that's what it needed to be in the moment. And as my craft has grown and my strength within the craft has grown, I go back and I read some of those things and I'm like, wow, it's really good work, but it could have been elevated. Now that's looking backwards with, hindsight. Now I'm very intentional about what I write. And I'll put it down. Like, I used to never put things down, but if I can't get the turn of phrase to be exactly what I need it to be to convey the point that I'm trying to make, I'll put it down until it can come to me. So it's a much more deliberate, precise exercise than it used to be.
I found a change came with age and lessening the ego as well.
Yes.
When I was younger and I would write, I was like, no, this is perfect, exactly the way it is. Kind of like what you just said, that's the way it came out. So that's the way it's supposed to be. Right. And I would be very like unopen to suggestions if I didn't show it to anybody or whatever, because I'm like, well, no, that's exactly how I felt. Like, how can you tell me that's wrong? Right.
Right.
And it's not that it's wrong. It's that in order to express myself more accurately, there is another way to do it. So now I've got a little bit used to like going back. Like I have, I'm sure this is probably true for you. I have an entire box down in the basement full of notebooks, like, those notebooks you'd buy for school. Like
yeah.
I have a box full of them that I've never looked at. I wrote all that shit. I threw it in that box. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of poems, and I'll probably never look at it. I'm gonna like leave it to my kids one day.
Yes.
Because I recognize that was kind of a point in time in my life where, although I was being very creative, I wasn't in my own power with it yet. It was really just like vomit soup coming out on pages,
right?
Which has its place, and I'm sure that like I could look through any one of those books and find a book of poetry in it probably. But over time, I started to get a little bit more kind of plan it out in here. Like I also write I write a bunch of different stuff. I'm writing a book right now, and so when I'm writing a chapter for my book, I actually imagine the whole thing. Like I play it out in my brain like it's a movie, and I'll do that for like a week, like just on one chapter, just beginning to end of this scene in my head, like it's a movie before I even sit down to write. That way I know I have the story all worked out.
Yeah.
And everything that actually goes from my fingers to the page ends up being all the descriptors, like everything that like gives it life, right? Or the story I've already created in here, so now I can give it life as I'm putting it down. So it does kind of change, and I think I learned a lot about myself and my own ego through doing it as well over time, especially working collaboratively with bands. I've done songs where there's like 3 singers on a song, and you're kind of like, this is what the song's about, this is the topic, go. And then we all have these 3 different little groups of poetry. And it's not until you've got them all together in that song that you can actually step back and go, oh, okay, they're actually all singing about the same thing, because it's like 3 different interpretations of the same topic. And something that I also learned for myself, just my own personal thing, was I used to be like very much like I wrote it, it's perfect, and this is what it means. Absolutely, this is what it means. It was when I started writing music where I started to notice, like as an example, my first the first album I ever did with the band called The Mindsight, we have a song on it called Reinfected. And I wrote it while doing cocaine after a few years of not touching cocaine because I have an addictive personality and I know better. But got together with some people, ended up doing some cocaine and felt that reinfection, right? Like my addictive personality kind of catching hold. So I wrote that song about that. It was about doing cocaine again for the first time in forever and being like, oh yeah, there's a reason why I don't touch you. Right. But the way that I worded it and the way that I presented it and even the way I sing it, it sounds like a love song. It sounds like I'm talking about an old lover coming back. And I deliberately picked words that would maybe lead towards a lover more than this drug. And so it's been interesting for me over time. Like as an example, that was the song that all the girls really liked. They were like, oh, yeah, I love that song. I'm like, would you like to know I sang it about coke?
That changes a little bit.
That changes everything, right? And I think that's one of the beautiful things about lyrics and poetry is that it doesn't matter what we mean when we write it, someone is going to add their own spin on
their own flavor to it. That's right. They're going to see it through their eyes. And it's, that's both a gift and a curse. Like, but, it's always interested me. The most specific, like the more specific a piece gets for me, the more relatable it seems to be to a group of people. And that blows my mind because I think how I choose to write about it can probably be interpreted as a lover or even an addiction. Because my love certainly was an addiction. And so there's a lot of different interpretation that comes, as you put a piece out. It's kind of crazy.
But I definitely agree with you. In my experience too, the more honest I've been, the more relation to it I've got from other people. Where I know with earlier writings, when I was trying to hold that back and maybe intentionally trying to skew things just that little bit, it ended up leading to a place where not as many people were relating to it. They were almost taking me super literally. Whereas it's such a backwards reaction because when I'm being super literal, people take that all over the place. But if I'm being kind of intentionally vague, people are looking for that. So I wonder if it's like part of our pareidolia or something, like our pattern recognition in our brain that like makes us do that. But it's definitely an interesting dynamic, and that's one of the beautiful things about and like anybody who's out there maybe listening to this who, you've created poetry, you've created art, you've created music, whatever that is, and you haven't shown it to the world yet. Showing it to the world is a whole other level of your experience, and it's a very important one.
It is. It's scary. It's vulnerable. But it is so worth it.
It'll definitely open up some new poetry.
I hope so.
Would you do you dabble in any other type of writing, or is it just poetry?
I have dabbled for like 19 years in writing a short story. I have no patience to sit down and write a whole novel, I think. So I've been writing this thing based on a Tori Amos song for like the last 20 years. I might finish it someday. That would be great. I started, so the series of poetry that I referenced before, the bar napkin scriptures, my editor really wants me to try to make that into a novel. And so I've written a couple chapters of that. But again, I just don't have I have pretty moderate ADD, and poetry is about my speed and the ability to tell a story. Yeah.
I've been, to be honest, I've been struggling with the discipline of writing.
Yes.
You kind of mentioned it earlier. I meant to comment on this then, but, forcing myself, I've always kind of worked based on inspiration. Like, hey, I'm inspired to work right now. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write something, right? And that's fine with poetry. That's been fine with song lyrics for the most part, and especially with lyrics, I've got the music in front of me, which can, bring that out. But I noticed with the novel, I'm like, I just don't feel like it right now. I just don't feel like it today. Like I'll do it when I feel like it. But then, a month goes by and you haven't written anything. So
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
take, do you have any type of like routine or discipline with your writing, or do you kind of just take your inspiration and run with it type?
I take my inspiration and run with it for the most part. I try to sit down, and I don't make this a high pressure practice. I sit down every day with the intent to write. One of three things happens. Either I think about where I'm at for that day and I realize what I really need to be doing is journaling. And that's, I can't seem to journal and write poetry at the same time. Like it's just, there's a certain kind of outlet that I need for journaling. I'll sit down and write and something will come out, or I'll sit down and nothing happens and I just probe around a little bit. It's like, is there something that you want to say today? What do you want to talk about? And if nothing comes after a couple minutes, I just close up my notes app and don't worry about it for the rest of the day. I just can't.
Taken your journaling and turned that into poetry?
No, I never have. No, I'm so self-conscious about the way I journal. It's ridiculous. It's like, I feel like every time I sit down, I'm supposed to say, "Dear diary, the weather is, I've had this many cigarettes today." Like blah, 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 blah. So I just blast shit in my,
I think I lost the sound right there. Are you there? Whatever reason, I lost.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
I'm here.
You're back. It was just an internet glitch. We're all good.
It happens. It happens. So I was just saying that my journal is just a word vomit. There's nothing worthy of picking up in there.
It'd be fun in and of itself, though. Just call it
Would be.
Today I smoked 22 cigarettes. That's way too many. Tomorrow I'm going to try and smoke less, but I'll probably fail.
I'll probably smoke more. I don't smoke anymore, but yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm jealous. Sort of.
Oh,
I love
smoking.
It. I'm a dragon. I love smoking.
Do you? I miss it sometimes. Like my dad is coming to visit for Thanksgiving, and I'm sure I'll smoke while he's here because he's a smoker. And so I'll smoke some of his cigarettes and I'll remember why I quit smoking in the first place. And it'll make me sick and it'll be great.
That's just it. When you were doing kind of open mics and stuff, did you ever like mentor anybody or have anyone kind of come to you asking you for advice and stuff like that?
I did. I had a really great circle of writers that I found doing open mics, and we opened a critique group. And it was really great because this sounds terrible, but you have to understand, like when I was coming up in Instagram, there was this period of time that was very strange that I was like a household name. Like I would meet people, like I went to a bachelorette party and this woman found out, and I didn't know her, but she found out who I was in terms of poetry through our mutual friend. And she had a bunch of my stuff saved on Pinterest and was like completely plotzed that she was meeting the person who had written it. So it was just this crazy, weird mini fame thing that happened. And nobody would give me good feedback. Like, nobody would give me good critique. And these guys did. They were like, "Oh, I think you could do this a little stronger. I think it could be better." And so I learned, much to your point, the ego becomes something very different when you start to expose your work to other writers for critique. And it's a very difficult thing to do. I would tell myself it was because that's my baby. Those are my feelings. Like you said, how can you tell me how to say that better? But the truth is, I didn't want to believe that it could be better. I thought it was great just the way it was. So I worked with this group for a while, and then I had a writing partner. And having a writing partner was such a great experience. We would critique each other's work. We would collaborate. We would be very honest with each other. He was another writer that I really, really admired, who's not on Instagram anymore. Excuse me. And so I really enjoyed being a part of a community that was all about helping to grow your expertise at your craft.
Yeah, it definitely helps when you have other like-minded people who are trying to achieve the same thing, to kind of not necessarily measure yourself against, but to have something outside yourself to look at. Because like,
Yeah.
especially while you're writing, you're kind of in a world, like you're in your own little dimension, more or less, the entire time you're writing. And then you get to the point where you're showing that to other people, and that opens your, like, it's like opening a window all of a sudden, and you're like, whoa, why is all this light here? And it can be overwhelming.
It can be. It can be. But I think if you are serious about getting better at what you do and honing your skills, it's a necessary step.
What if there's a young lady out there listening to you right now and being like, I'd really like to take a stab at that, I don't know if I'm good enough, blah blah blah, all the stuff that we would tell each other, what would be your advice?
There's no such thing as good enough. Everybody writes bad poetry. Everybody. I have a file of shit. It's out there. Just do it. Write from the heart. Put it out there. You never know who you're going to impact with your story and your experience. It's unique. Share it. Don't hide the talent. Share it. Get better. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I've had plenty of writers reach out to me and ask me to mentor them. And I think a lot of people in this community in Instagram are willing to do the same. So ask, you just never know.
Amanda Palmer wrote a book called The Art of Asking that I suggest people read often, because, I know from my experience doing podcasts on my other channel, there's a lot of people out there that you might not think, using the podcast analogy, might not think would be willing to have that conversation with you. But if you ask, you might be wrong. And when it comes to creatives, I think all of us, we understand that, especially like people closer to our age that didn't have the internet growing up, it was really hard to bounce these ideas off of other people. You had a very small peer group to do that with. And like, you imagine, like, you've got a class of 30 kids and you're a poet, or you're an aspiring poet, and you want to share your poetry with these people. Out of that 30 kids, there might be one or two who also is interested in poetry. And that's so right. The other, 28, 27 kids are going to be like, I don't care, right? And so they're not going to give you back any type of feedback that can actually help you in any way. But, now that we have the internet, there's poetry communities, there's forums you can go on, there's all of the above. So people today have a lot more access to, learning skills, and feedback's one of them.
And I would say any live opportunity that you get to collaborate, take it. I came up in open mic circles, and I was part of I think I helped found the Poetry Society at high school. And, seek to find these groups of like-minded people, because you can hone your skills just as well speaking your poetry open mic. Take it the next step into the real world. Once you're comfortable sharing it online. I think online is more brutal, to be honest with you. I have had some critical comments, which I always appreciate. You just got to have a tough skin. That's the other thing I'd say. You got to have a tough skin and believe in yourself.
I think that's true for just about every art, right? If you really, you need to almost be in a place where you have enough integrity behind what you're doing that although you're listening to the criticism, you're absorbing it, you're not taking it personally. And
there's a trick to that, to not taking it personally, because what you do is super subjective because it comes from your experience, but you can't control how people will consume that. Yeah. And how they consume it is not on you. It's not, it's not on you.
Yeah. And I was saying, like, don't take it personally. I know that sounds ridiculous because what you're actually exposing is like the most personal part of yourself, but they're not critiquing you. They're critiquing
that experience. They're critiquing the way you spoke about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's go through one more time. Do you have another poem you can read us?
I can, sure. Do you have something in particular that you You want something raunchy? Do you want something sad?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's go raunchy.
Want to go raunchy? All right, you got to give me a second to find something then. La la la.
I think that the raunchy thing it's hilarious because I mean sex sells so much in this culture, and yet so many people are so scared to death of talking about it and exposing that part of themselves. So
okay, well this one this should give you what you're looking for, I think. It's called I Need to Learn to Keep My Hands to Myself. I am the hammer on a gun, cocked at the slightest perception of offense. I sit so sweet against a fist, blooms in my cheeks, almost always from my makeup, but sometimes I'm clumsy, and my hands end up in other people's pockets, handkerchiefs and gum mostly, but sometimes there's a hard cock, and it bucks into my hand as I stroke it without thinking. I get lost thinking of you as a stranger's hand opens my blouse, as his other slides along the wet seam of my panties. I'd fuck this guy in a heartbeat if the melody in my head just kept playing, but it stopped like a carousel at the end of my turn. So I pull away from his fingers, questing away inside of me, and I remember how it felt to be pinned to the bed by your cock and your hands in my hair. And I come on my own with him standing frustrated over me, stroking his cock against my leg. I laugh it off again, and I know he'll have blue balls later. I can't bring myself to care. He's not you, and I need to learn to keep my hands to myself.
Very well done. Very well done. Perfect. Well, let's wrap it up. Tell people where they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram, poetica.ex.machina, POTICAEXMACHINA. Oh my God, I can spell the whole thing by myself.
Well done. I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have stuttered like 4 or 5 times.
I did it. So find me on Instagram. That's where you can get all the information about me, books, and that type of information.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to your new work. I will definitely be appropriating that book when you're done with it. So we'll be in touch. I'll figure that out. But hope everyone else will check it out as well, because your work is beautiful. I enjoy it pretty much every day. I find something. Sometimes I'll just go through your page just to read them. Not that I'm stalking you in any sort of way.
No. Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
I enjoyed it as well. Thank you for doing it. And everybody at home, have a wonderful day. And bye for now.